This is Emily Hull with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Monday, December 17th, 2018, and I'm in Seminole, Oklahoma, interviewing Jessica Isaacs for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Jessica, you're an award-winning poet, a professor at Seminole State College, and director of the annual Howlers and Yappers Creativity Symposium, just to name a few of your many accomplishments. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
So where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Okemah, Oklahoma, and then my parents moved to Prague, just 20 miles down the road, when I was about 3 years old. And I grew up there and left to go to college at East Central in Ada.
All right.
Again, just a little further down the road. And met my husband there. Then we moved to Oklahoma City after graduation and lived there a few years and then decided to have children and moved back to Prague.
All right. How would you describe Prague? Would you say you spent most of your childhood there?
Yes.
Yeah. What's it like? How would you describe the landscape, people, things you like to do?
It's a place of free-range children.
Yeah.
Which was important to my husband and I. He grew up in Kanawha. So we wanted a small town community like what we both had growing up, where we could ride our bikes all over town, go to the pool, go to the park, walk to ball games, walk downtown and eat pizza with our friends, go to the bakery, all of that. And so it's a very tight-knit community, a safe community. I know no place is 100% safe.
Right.
But if I had a fender bender in high school, my dad knew about it before I ever got home from high school. It was that kind of community. Right. So we always felt like there was a large number of people looking out for us, my brother and I, when we were growing up.
So let's talk about your parents a little bit. You mentioned your dad. What's his name? What's he like? What did he do?
Okay. My dad's name is Gary Simpson, and he was is still a pharmacist in Prague all of my life. In fact, that's why my parents moved to Prague, was because my dad was part owner of the Prague Pharmacy there on Main Street for all of my growing up years. Since then, they've built another pharmacy across town that my brother, who's an architect, designed. And so it's a very special thing. But then Dad sold his business and decided to retire. And now he's only coming in to give the new owner pharmacist, a couple days off a week. So Dad still gets to come in, fill prescriptions, and be part of the community.
All right. Yeah. How about your mom?
My mother was a third grade teacher in Payton, which is a very, very small town, about 5 miles east of Prague. And I used to love going up to the school with her to help her with her billboards, to write on the chalkboard while she graded papers, that kind of thing. And every now and then she'd let me help her grade papers when she brought them home from school. And so I give her great credit to why I'm an educator today.
Yeah. And what was her name?
Debbie Simpson.
Debbie. And you mentioned that you had a brother, younger?
He's younger, yes, 3 years younger than me. He'll be 40 on his birthday coming up this year.
Welcome to that.
Oh, yeah.
So what's he like? You have any memorable stories?
He's an artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have fond memories of him. We had these floor furnace things in my house when we were growing up. We didn't have central heat and air, but we had a floor furnace. I don't even know if any houses still have those. But some of my earliest memories of my brother, he was probably 5, laying on the furnace or laying on the floor next to the furnace where it was warm with all of his crayons and his coloring books and just coloring. He couldn't keep his tongue in his mouth when he colored it. Every time he would color a stroke, that tongue would shoot out of his mouth. So he would spend hours on the floor just coloring next to the furnace. And as we've both grown and become adults, I've actually written a children's book, and it's not been published. We just have a copy of it for my daughter, but he's done all the illustration for that. My first little chapbook that I put together, Smoldering Embers, which I just published myself, so I'd have something to take to readings to give to people. He designed the cover for that, so we've been able to collaborate a little bit on some things, and that's been fun.
Yeah, that's neat to have. So, either one of your parents pretty artistic, and your mom with being a teacher, and how creative
I would say
you have to
they
be there?
both are very artistic in their own ways. My mother, even though she's not actually ever written full-length projects to my knowledge, nor has she published anything, she's a bit of a writer herself, and has always been a reader too. And my father is a musician. My mother is too, but my father still plays the drums at church.
Really?
Yeah.
I bet that's noisy to practice. Does he practice at home?
He practices in the barn, which is more like a game room than a barn. But, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. Well, how about your grandparents?
Well, I really didn't have much of a relationship with my grandfather. My mother's father died when she was very young, and so I never knew him. My dad's dad, we just didn't see him very much, and he's long since passed on too. But my two grandmothers really are part of a long legacy of very strong women in my family, and I have very strong aunts and mothers. And so I don't know what it would be like to grow up without a community of strong mothers, of strong women who've had to pull themselves up without the aid of a man in their lives, providing for them, So my nanny in particular, which was my mom's mom, and actually her house, my mom's youngest sister, Sherry, lives in my nanny's house right now in Castle. And we spent every holiday out there, every after school day, it was kind of a perk of living just a few miles away from her growing up. And Nanny always had a book in her hand, all kinds of books. And my aunts, my mom has 3 sisters, and Nanny would read a book and we'd circulate it amongst the aunts. And whenever I became old enough to read these adult books, then I would get to read them too. And we would rate the books with the star system on the inside cover and date it, when we each read it, put our initials, put our little review on there, and then send it on to the next aunt or cousin there.
Do you still have copies of
a few of them I do, but I'm
rating?
not supposed to have them. They were supposed to have gone back to the original owners, but I've forgotten now whether it was Aunt Judy, Aunt Sherry, Aunt Connie, my mom, who it was. So I do have some of those still.
Yeah, so reading together, I'm sure that's a great memory. Do you have any other memories that kind of stand out about your grandmothers from?
Nanny always made herself available to us. She had 2 husbands, and they both died, both leaving her with 2 little girls each time, which was a really horrible way of history repeating itself. But she still always made her home available to all of her grandchildren. She was very much an introvert, so it wasn't like her home was available to everybody in town,
right?
But we knew as her grandkids that there would always be something good to eat and something fun to do. We knew we were loved when we went there.
Yeah, I think that's important. So how would you describe yourself as a child, like your personality, hobbies, interests, what you dreamed of doing?
Oh, goodness.
In the
future? That's a hard one. And I see a lot of myself in my own daughter. When I was very small, I thought, I'm going to be a singer. Well, I can't sing. I can't carry a tune. I'm like tone deaf, And so that didn't work out. But I've always written, and I thought they were songs. Now I call them poems, And so I always thought, well, I'll be a singer, I'll be a musician, and my life just took a different path there. But I always knew that I liked to write. I always knew I was good at writing, and it wasn't ever something I never would have said, oh, I'm a poet, I'm a writer. It's part of who I am. And so I introduced myself as, hi, I'm Jessica Isaacs, and that's what you get too, is I write, because it's a part of who I have to be as a human being. And as soon as I learned to hold a pen in my hand, I've been writing stories, you know, or poems or songs or whatever you want to call them.
So what's your earliest memory writing something?
Probably, really, as soon as I learned how to write, probably at 5 years old. My mother has an actual story that I wrote. I drew the pictures of, and it was something about a princess and a rainbow. I don't know exactly, but I remember it had a plot. And, you know, this princess went through some kind of complication, and I would like to say she probably wasn't rescued by the prince, but I bet she probably was. At 5 years old, that's the stories that we hear and that we tell. But my mother still has that. Last time I saw it was in our big family Bible that was on the in the buffet table, you know, hutch thing. I don't know what you call that.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
So what was your favorite subject in school?
English. Always English. Always.
Did you have teachers who encouraged your creativity, or do you think that was just kind of fostered at home as well?
I had very good teachers, and I wish that, and this is certainly not a slam against educators today or any of my own children's educators, but I think that my teachers had a lot more freedom when I was growing up in the 80s from my elementary school years, and in the 90s from my middle and junior high. But middle and junior high, that's the same thing. Middle and high school, I'm sorry. Whereas today, it seems like it's all these AR points for reading and all of this very strict curriculum that they have to all follow for some standardized tests. And I know that we had achievement tests even then. But I had one teacher in particular, Mrs. Upton. I had her in the first grade and the third grade. She switched grades when I came along again. And she encouraged us when we finished our work early. We got to, as a reward, read quietly at our desks. And then we were rewarded with getting to write a little story, you know, about what we read. And so it was kind of like a summary or an adaptation. But she encouraged us to take away from the reading what we got out of it, wherever we were in our lives. She encouraged us to talk about that and how we could relate it to the stories that we read. And that was just one of the ways that we did book reports then, even as early as first grade and then again in the third grade. And I just remember reading and writing and her being interested in what we had to say about what we read. And I don't know that either of my children with the current language arts curriculum have gotten that level of self-reflection and synthesis of information in their own reading.
Our reading lives can be a life into itself. It's really, you know, you have to have someone to encourage you on how to do that. Were there particular books from your childhood that you remember, like stories that you really loved?
The Secret Garden was, and probably still is, my favorite book like that. It's just the whole element of nature transforming us and helping us get back to who we are, too. And the garden had a profound impact on all of the characters in the story, you know. And that it's resonated with me in different ways at different points in my life, obviously, as I've grown. But as a child, I picked it up because it was the hardest book I could find to read. And I guess I was probably in the third grade when I read it, with all the colloquialisms and vernacular and all of that it was written in. I thought, oh, I'm going to read this book and show my mom I can read a hard book. You know, it's always a challenge to me. I'm going to read the hardest book I can find. And I was so proud of myself when I finished that. But I actually got something out of it, too.
Have you gone back and reread it as an adult?
I have.
Yeah.
And it's a much different experience now. But it's still rewarding to me.
So tell me about your educational path after high school. You mentioned ECU, right?
Yes, I went to East Central on a music scholarship to play trumpet in the band.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And I thought I was going to be a band director. And then I quickly discovered that it took me about 17 times as much practice to learn the music as someone who had the natural ability for that. And I was spending so many hours in the practice rooms, I was miserable. And it wasn't that I loved music any less. It just became painfully obvious that that was not for me anymore. And the classes that I took in the English department were becoming more important to me than any of the practicing in the music department. I had a class with John Yozo, Contemporary American Poetry. And that was a pivotal moment for me.
Was it, why is that?
I'm trying not to cry.
Oh, it's okay.
Well, John Yozo has become a very dear friend and mentor of mine too.
Yeah.
And I saw so much of my soul in those poems that we read in the class. And I felt like I was home.
Yeah, I think that's a good, a good way to.
And I thought,
to put that.
If I get that feeling here, I'm probably supposed to do something with that, for my life. And he was such an encouragement to me. And I can't even remember the other classes I ended up taking with Yozo, but it was like if there was a Yozo class on the schedule, I was going to enroll in that class. And I took several courses with him while I was in school at East Central. He was always very encouraging. And I even find the way that I teach my composition students and my American Lit students, my creative writing students, very similar to some of the ways that he taught us, and I try to think, what would Yozo do whenever I'm making a lesson plan, even to this day. So
were you writing poetry then? When did you start kind of getting serious about
probably toward the end of that semester. That would have been, I guess, maybe the second semester of my freshman year in college. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to change my life path. I'm going to, much to the chagrin of my parents, give up my band scholarship and apply for an English scholarship. I'm going to send poems out to maybe be published in Originals, which was the East Central student anthology of poetry and prose and different things. And I sent in maybe 4 or 5, and I think they picked a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was really proud. I thought, okay, well, this gives me a little bit of hope, and I felt a little validated. And I had never stopped writing. I've written all of my life. I have boxes full of poems that no one should ever see from when I was 10, 12, the 15, whatever years. Or everybody hates me, lost love.
It's some sonnets in there.
I should probably burn those. But so I had just always written. But I think being in that class and that community of students talking about the great contemporary American poets gave me the courage to maybe become part of that community of people who had a love for that kind of thing. Because growing up in Prague, Oklahoma, I maybe had some really good English teachers, and I did, but still, people in Prague don't read a lot of poetry.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not going to run into them at the grocery store and have a conversation about great writers and poetry,
Yeah.
And so football maybe, but not poetry.
Sure. Yeah. That's how it goes. For sure. So did you ended up majoring in English, and after you graduated from ECU, then what happened?
Well, it still wasn't even quite that clean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I also had a major in speech communication. And I thought, I can't make a living out of being a poet. And I knew that I did not want to teach high school English. I knew that much, you know. So I thought, and I thought for a while that I might want to teach high school English and speech. And so I took an education class. It was Intro to Teaching. And I dropped that class halfway through the semester. And I told my mother, who was a lifetime third grade teacher, I said, I can't do this. I can't be beholden to school boards and all of these things. I don't know that, I can do this. And So we had a real deep conversation. And I don't really like children. I have two. I like my own. There's a few select kids that I feel like I get on well with. But to be in charge of them on a daily basis.
That's different.
I could never do that. And so I knew that I couldn't do that. So I thought, well, I should just probably go into broadcast news then. For some reason, I don't know why I thought that. And so I ended up with this communication degree. And I did an internship at KTUL in Tulsa and quickly decided that was not for me. But now what was I going to do with this other degree that I had? So I ended up with 2 degrees and still no idea what I wanted to do. So I got a job in advertising. And I worked a job at advertising at Ackerman McQueen in Oklahoma City, fresh out of college. It was a good job, good benefits, lots of room to move up. But I quickly discovered that was not for me. And what I found myself doing was writing poem after poem after poem about trying to find my place in the world. Another group of poems I should probably burn and not let anyone ever see. And my husband and I had just gotten married too. And so graduated college, got married, moved to Oklahoma City, started a new job. I was in a very, very dark place in my life, which for some people they would say, you were in the perfect place. Look at all these wonderful things you had going on. I was so depressed. I was miserable because I wasn't being true to who I was. And that's when I thought, okay, well, what would Yozo do? Yozo would be a college professor, right? And write. So I thought, okay, well, I need to be honest with myself. And every time I would envision what I wanted to do with my life, it involved teaching in a college setting and writing. So I thought, well, I need to go back to college. So I had a bachelor's degree in English. So I thought, well, I'll get my master's. And so I did. And I got it in playwriting at University of Central Oklahoma. Yes. Well, I think it was actually called the Creative Studies program with an emphasis in playwriting at that time. And loved it. Just loved it. But I had to quit my job at Ackerman McQueen because I could not be in school and work 80-hour weeks in advertising. It was awful. And so I think I had a divine appointment with a lady at the state fair of all places right after I quit my job at Ackerman McQueen and had sent in my application to UCO to try to get into grad school. I ran into, her name is Elena Anderson, and she was working at that time, she's no longer with them, but at that time she was working with the ClearSight Center, the Laser Vision Center in Oklahoma City. And she said, for some reason, she said, do you need a job? And I had never laid eyes on this woman in my life. And I said, why, yes, I do.
How about that?
And she said, well, I don't know why I'm asking you this, but would you like to come in and interview with us? Because we're looking for someone to help us with, going to trade shows and doing some PR and marketing work and things like that. I said, well, yes, I would like that. And so I scheduled a time. I had my little portfolio of brochures and pamphlets I'd put together as an undergrad in my communication degree and showed up for the interview. And a couple of weeks later, they hired me on to help them at the ClearSight Center. So I did some patient relations work and helped them with some of their promotions and marketing and things like that, and absolutely loved that job. They were the kindest people ever. Just beautiful, beautiful people there. And they allowed me to work there while I went to grad school. And then whenever I received the teaching assistantship at UCO, they were very kind. I said, I told them, I said, I don't think I can work and teach and take my classes, so I need to not work here anymore. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys, but I've got to make a choice because I can't do it all. And they said, well, if you ever need us, we're here. So it was very nice. So I left them for a year. And then I probably don't want to go into all the details, but my husband and I went on a little vacation to Cozumel. We had a car wreck and ended up buying a VW Bug there, and I needed more money. So it was a long, involved thing. We got out of Mexico. So I guess we're some kind of fugitives or something. And
Like you drove out?
No,
Yeah.
we got to fly out, but we had to get the ambassador and everybody involved because the police officers in Mexico confiscated our driver's license, and this was before you had to have passports, right? So we had just flown in with our driver's license, and then when our driver's licenses were confiscated, we didn't know if we were going to be able to fly out to come back to the States. Yeah. So $3,000 later, and a call to the U.S. Embassy. We have our driver's license, and we're getting out of Cozumel. And so when I got home, I called Clearsight Center and said, we had a little incident. I need to make more money. Can I come back to work for you all? And they said, sure.
Wow.
It was really nice. So I went back and worked for them for another maybe year and a half until I got my graduate degree. And then my husband and I had been talking about having children, and so we decided to move back to Prague. And then I got a couple of adjunct teaching jobs both here at Seminole State College and at Oklahoma Baptist University. And so then I quit the nice people at Clearsight yet again.
Yes.
But they were very kind to me and important at a pivotal place in my life.
So how long have you been at Seminole State?
I always go by how old my son is plus 1 year because I was here when I was pregnant with him. So 17 years here.
Okay. And you teach? Are there other things that you do as well?
Do a lot. Like a lot of educators in the state of Oklahoma, I wear a lot of hats because I'm trying to make enough money to support my family and pay off some student loans. And so right now, this past semester, I taught 7 classes, which is 2 more than our required 5-course load a semester at community college level. And I'm a faculty advisor. Currently, I have about 80 students that I advise, help them with their enrollment every semester and things like that. And I'm also accreditation coordinator. So I've got a lot.
Yeah.
A lot going on. Yeah.
And you've got this book, Deep August. That won the 2015 Oklahoma Book Award for poetry. So tell me about just the whole process that went into getting this book together. You've got so many poems. Yeah.
It was a challenging process, a messy process. And I just have to thank Dorothy Alexander, my publisher, for being so patient with me through that process. It wasn't my first book to ever put together. And she really took a chance on me, and I'll always be grateful to her for that. Going back to the question earlier about mentors and all, I've got John Yozo, I've got Dorothy Alexander, Jim Spur, who's no longer with us, was a wonderful supporter of mine. And I've got Ken Hayda, too. Just so many people. But being part of that community has really helped me. But Dorothy came to listen to me at Full Circle Bookstore at a reading I was invited to there. And because of another beautiful lady, Carol Hamilton, I guess, who had recommended me to the Full Circle Poetry Group. And then they invited me to come. And I had my little chapbook that I put together with my brother's art on the cover. And Dorothy was there listening to me, and she saw my little chapbook, and she said, if you have a few more poems, we could put together a real book for you. And I said, really? Okay. Oh, thank you, Dorothy. Thank you. You know, and so then we had some email correspondence back and forth. And from start to finish, I believe the process was about 2 years before we had the full book completed. I wanted to put anything I'd ever written into the book, which it didn't belong. And so Dorothy was very kind, yet also very honest in telling me, this poem, not so much, Jess, let's cut it out, you know. And so I basically, whatever Dorothy said, I did. For my book. And I'm glad that I did, because I learned so much about layout and grouping poems together according to different theme, and like just the entire arc of a book that I could not have learned otherwise. I think other editors, publishers would have said, this is a jumbled up mess. call me again in 4 years when you have it sorted out on your own.
Yeah.
But she was very patient with me and helped me through that whole process.
And that's part of writing and learning
it is.
to write, I think,
Mm-hmm.
working with those mentors who can help you shape
Yes.
things and help give you those instincts, I think,
Yes.
for future
Yes.
pieces.
And Ken Hada went through my book several times and gave me lots of good advice about that too, as did Rachel Clapper, a very dear friend of mine, and used to be colleague before she got more money in California to teach and left us all.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can't blame her. but just kind people who took time out of their day to help with that, because none of us can do it alone.
Right. So there are several themes in your book that I wanted to talk about. The first one I wanted to start with was place.
Okay.
Oklahoma as a place, or just the natural aspects to it. It's rich, it's complicated, it's interesting, it's really ideal for poetry. Can you think of poems that might represent Oklahoma for you, or maybe just talk about what it's like writing about place as one of your themes?
Okay. I never really realized how unusual it might be to be so rooted to a place until I was having a conversation again with Rachel Clapper, my dear friend. She's kind of a free spirit, a tumbleweed, likes to go to different places. And we were having a conversation one day. She said, I've never felt rooted to a place. When she thinks about her sense of family and of identity, it's more about the people, not necessarily the location, the place. And I got to thinking, and for me, it is still about the people, but it's very much about the place, too. And everything that I write seems to be rooted in place. It could be my nanny's pond. It could be the pasture, the woods, my nanny's house. It might be, small town Prague, Oklahoma. A lot of times it's the Lake Tenkiller, because every summer of my life and most of the summers in my mom's life, when she was a child even, we've spent summers at the lake, on the water, in the water, around the water. And so the rocks, the trees, all of these elements come up time and time again for me. And I can't imagine being fully who I am in any other place. There are times that I think I need to leave Oklahoma because if I'm going to make more money as an educator, I need to leave Oklahoma. But I just can't seem to uproot myself to do it.
So there's a poem in your book called Oklahoma.
Yes.
It's on page 95. Do you mind
I'm
reading that? Because
happy
I think it speaks
to read that
to what we were saying here.
So it's Oklahoma. Oklahoma, I love you. These trees of Southern California are beautiful, but they are not my trees. These palms and smooth, pale bark slip through my hands, but they are not the black walnut, the pecan, the oak, that I can rub my hands raw against the roughness of changing seasons, their acorns cutting into my bare feet, their fallen leaves changing slowly from the pressures of 10,000 years into the oil coursing through the blood-red soil deep inside my earth.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure we'll come back to Oklahoma as a place as we keep moving along, because like you said, it's just not something you can really separate from yourself. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about how your work addresses womanhood in its many iterations, from mother, wife, lover, daughter. I wanted to start with motherhood. We were kind of chatting before we started recording and filming the interview about the mental load of motherhood and how we end up creating despite the exhaustion. This time and space is a luxury. Can you speak to that a little bit? What it's like creating as a mom and busy person?
I feel like a crazy person most of the time. Yes,
I get that.
To put it bluntly, there is no time There's
Yeah.
no time just to sit and be. And so if you're
Yeah.
going to have time to write, I found that I had to just carry my writing with me everywhere I went. And so I would have in the bottom of my purse, you know, especially when my daughter was very small, I might have a sippy cup and a couple of Walmart receipts with parts of a poem scribbled on the back, you know.
Yeah.
Going back to something Yozo told us as a class many years ago, he said, the way you know it's good writing and something you should really write down is if you carry it around in your head for a while and it's still there, you know. And I thought, okay. But then when I became a mother, I thought, no, if I don't write it down immediately, anything I try to carry around in my head, it's not going to still be there.
Right.
So I had to adjust my way of thinking a little bit. Still, a lot of my writing does take place in my head. And I'm getting stronger at trying to remember things despite the exhaustion, right? My kids are older, so I don't have the sleepless nights anymore with crying babies and all of that. But I still very much have to steal moments. And it may be on my drive in the morning, recording my voice as I talk my way through bits of a poem on my phone. It might be, you know, before everybody wakes up in the house. I've suddenly become a morning owl. Morning owl, is that a thing? A morning bird? Not a night owl, but a morning bird. You know, just to get that time, you know. But you got to get a hold of life and milk it for everything that it's worth, or we should just all lay down and die, right? And so that I do have an anxiety problem, which probably comes from a lot of this mental load. But as women, we think we can do it all. And I did too. I thought I could do it all. I couldn't. You know, I have a poem in my book called The Apology, you know, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes thinking, oh my gosh, I've ruined my kids. I should have done this or I should have done that. But, you know, I did the best I could, as we all do the best we can at that time in our lives. And the house may have been disgusting. There may have been clothes all over the floor, but I couldn't grade 80 essays in 2 days and keep the house picked up and keep the kids happy and keep myself healthy. Something has to give.
Having it all is a myth.
Yes, it is a total myth, and it is a damaging myth to women today, to mothers today, and it's damaging to fathers too, because it shouldn't be the woman's mental load. Women shouldn't have to remember to remind the husband to take the load out of the laundry. You know, they shouldn't have to remember to remind the husband to remember to make the kid's appointment. That's also his kid, you know? But we put that on ourselves. And I've had this conversation with my husband, so I'm not outing him or anything. But it's like it doesn't occur to him to remember to remind me to do things. Does that make any kind of sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And that's part of the exhaustion.
It is.
Of, you know, it takes up this energy.
Right.
And we need that, like you said, that space, that time to be.
Yes.
To be with ourselves and the work
of
creativity.
So I find whenever I'm trying to manage my husband, like I'm trying to manage my kids, that it's time for me to take a time out. You know, and Michael, my husband's real quick to say, I'm not your kid. You know? But still, as women, I think that we are conditioned socially to think that we have to remember everything for everyone. And so the other side of that is, as men too, our boys, our sons, they're also conditioned socially that maybe they don't have to remember. And so it's not, I wouldn't necessarily say anybody's fault per se, but we got to do something better for our future generations, you know, because we can't keep up this pace. It's been too much for me. I talk to many women, it's too much for them. And eventually something has to give. You know.
So the apology, do you mind reading that?
Sure. I don't remember what page that one is on. Let's see if I can find that in here. It seems to, like, I have several poems that celebrate my kids, but others too that's like, dudes, I'm sorry. Mama did the best she could, right?
And I think that's an important message to put across, because like we were saying, you can't do it all.
No.
And we have to talk about it to change things.
We do. And I think that women often put off going to school, or put off writing, or put off pursuing their dream job, or put off things because they're always waiting, right?
Right.
We're waiting on having the baby. We're waiting on till the baby is weaned, or till the baby is potty trained, or till the baby is in school, or we're waiting until our husband gets settled in their job, or we're waiting until money comes in. It's always a sense of waiting. I got sick of waiting.
Yeah.
And I still have to sit around and wait sometimes, and it ticks the hell out of me. But again, that's a cultural part of our world.
Yeah.
And I hope that for my daughter's sake, she won't sit around and wait, you know? But anyway, so I have this poem, The Apology, and I always felt very guilty when I held my son. And I say it was actually my husband and my decision. We made the decision together, but I still take it upon myself. We held my son back in the 2nd grade because he just needed another year. You know, he was very young for his class. He just needed another year of development. And it was the best decision we ever made, but I felt so guilty for doing that. And I think that that's really where a lot of this came from in this poem, The Apology, was the guilt that I felt. I thought, am I messing him up for the rest of his life? If I don't do it, will I mess him up for the rest of his life? It's always, will I mess my kids up for the rest of their lives? I think that's the biggest struggle we have as mothers. So here's my poem, The Apology. What was I supposed to have done? Apologize for the piles of laundry, the stacks of bills, the unwashed dishes, the toys strewn all over the yard like so much garbage, the bedroom so messy we carved a path through the clothes and trash from door to bed just so we wouldn't trip in the night if you called out to us in the darkness. Was I supposed to tell you? I'm sorry for the hours of homework you had to endure every night, or the nights I had to work so long that I had no time or energy left over for you. What was I supposed to say when we could not be there at your school parties or ball games or concerts, when no kid slept over or asked you to sleep over? How could I apologize for you, still scared of the dark, for dreading school every day, for feeling so lonely and angry? Was it my fault? Is it my fault? How could I have stopped any of this? How can I change our past when it is gone? I'm sorry. So very, very sorry. But I still don't know. I never knew what to do. I don't know how to fix this. I'm still not even sure that it's a poem.
Really?
Really. It's more just a declaration of, I'm substandard, son. I suck. I'm sorry. You know? And I don't know why I feel that way when I think of motherhood. I mean, I keep my kids fed, well-dressed. They get to do fun stuff. I have a pile of Christmas presents for them all ready to go. You know, they get money whenever they need it for school things. My son even has a vehicle to drive. Of course, my dad provided that, but we provide the insurance, you know. I mean, so they're not doing without anything. Yet still, as a mother, I feel substandard. And I wonder if that's something most mothers feel, they just don't admit it. You know?
That's a pretty common thought. And how do you think that sort of feeling, or even reading something like the apology and just feeling that so deeply, even though, you know, your children are older now and things are kind of different in your house, how do you think that affects you as a poet, or just your writing and how you just think of yourself?
Writing about those issues helped me to frame those issues in a way that maybe if I can't make sense of it, I can at least make the image of the problem more concrete in my mind. So it becomes a real thing that I can manage somehow. So it's almost like a way to manage my own nervousness and anxiety of life. And I don't write for therapy, even though poetry therapy is a very real and powerful thing. I write to spark an image. I think in terms when I write of images. But if I can grasp and abstract emotion that I'm feeling and turn it into a concrete moment in a poem.
Yeah.
I just feel like I can handle that better emotionally, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, because then it turns, I mean, the narrator, it could be you. I mean, the I is never the
Right.
I, right?
Some of these are full out fiction in my book, you know?
Yeah. Well,
So-
and we can never, you know,
Right.
assume anything about who the narrator is. And once the reader gets a hold of it, then that kind of takes on sort of a different life. What do you think makes a poem or makes a poem like a classic or enduring or resonating people?
I think whenever a poem can exist on many different levels or planes, if you will, of existence. And I think of Robert Frost, my favorite poem or poet of all time, particularly his poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And it can exist as a little sing-songy kind of nursery rhyme, little poem that you can tell your children when they're very young. It can exist on a spiritual level, the religious level. There's very careful numbering of syllables and meters and all of that, almost like a chant in a way. And so it could become a religious experience. There's the musical level, there's the imagery level. But I think that when a poem can take so many different levels of being in existence at one time, and it's something that a person can come back to time and time again at different places or seasons in their own life and get something new from it each time. I think that's what makes a poem great and gives it lasting power.
Well, this may be an unfair question. You don't have to. You don't have to answer it. But is there? And I don't like asking poets to pick a favorite. And I know we're going to save a certain poem maybe for a little bit later. But do you have a poem or two that you think really kind of embodies this like existing in these multiple layers?
There are a couple that I have purposefully tried to do that with. And that is something that I'm playing with right now as I'm working on my second book, is looking at this idea of, what makes a poem exist on these different levels, right? And I have a workshop I'll be teaching with the Red Earth MFA program in January. And the title of my workshop is Archetypes in Action. And so I'm looking again, rereading Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. And I'm looking at Donald Levering's, the funny title of his poetry book, Algonquin's Planted Salmon, I believe is the title. And he has a lot of poems that draw upon archetypes. And I've been thinking too about the idea of what personal symbols are. And so I find in my own writing the personal symbols of river rocks and of lake, of sun and trees come up again and again and again. Those are archetypes too. And so I feel like I'm getting away from your question here, but I think that when we look at layering our work with, what is the personal? What is the universal? And, what is the in-between there too? And an imagery, I believe, is the imagery and the sound element have to work together to make a poem resonate with that kind of spark.
So is there one that you want to read?
Oh, yeah. That was the question.
Well, I mean, there's lots of parts to the question, but I wanted to get that background to it before we read it. So I think that's important to have.
I have one called The Sweetest Incense that draws upon some of these personal symbols as well as archetypes. It's a moment in time and all of that has the different layers. But as far as existing on multiple planes, the ones that I purposefully tried to do that with would be the birds with some magical realism in there. And I think magical realism lends itself to what we're talking about here. And then also She Dreamed of Running. So I don't know how many of those you would like to hear.
As many as you
Well, let's do
like
the
reading.
Sweetest Incense
Okay.
first. And that's the one that, of course, has some of those. When I was writing it, I was thinking about where I was in my personal life and then what is the universal that's associated with that.
Mhm.
So this is it. The Sweetest Incense. You flit among the sycamores like the fresh April sunlight, glinting off the lake in sparkling ripples, washing the stillness of another quiet winter away, like these gentle waves scrubbing the river stones into glimmering earth tones, and you are all angles and sunlight this year. You are ready, plunging head first into the brilliance of another changing season as I lag behind you, wondering when it was that you shucked off your soft edges of babyhood, knowing that I must become ready for another summer to gently burn away another year of your childhood, smoldering it into the sweetest sacrifice, a savory incense rising from your beautiful life, the purest wonder under the sun. And then the one that I was playing with, the idea of this magical realism and how we can exist maybe in multiple realities at the same time, is called The Birds. And I wrote that based on my nanny.
Mhm.
She lingered in and out of hospitals and in the nursing home for a few years before she finally passed away. So this one is called The Birds. Crazed out of her mind with the high fever and the infection the doctors couldn't treat because she was allergic to all the antibiotics that they tried, she stayed in intensive care at the Arkansas Memorial Hospital through Christmas, crying out for a smoke, angry with the nurses, accusing them of stealing her cigarettes, for being cruel and smoking them right there in front of her in her hospital room. And then, when she pointed crazy at the bright red poinsettias on the shelf in her room and screamed at us to get those blackbirds out of her room, when she kept telling us over and over in frenzied tones, eyes wild with fear, about how those blackbirds flew round in a circle above her bed and how they all fell dead one by one around her, we were convinced she had to be out of her mind. But then, 3 days later, when her fever broke and all those blackbirds in Arkansas fell dead out of the sky, and no one really had any good explanation for it, well then, we weren't so sure. And we thought maybe, just maybe, she hadn't really been out of her mind at all, but instead, perhaps, those blackbirds had been in hers. And then I have, she dreamed of running.
Mm-hmm.
She dreamed of running past her Parkinson's, past her wheelchair and her walker, past the dying people lined up in the nursing home hallway, and right on out the heavy glass doors. She dreamed of running, past the nightmares of her widowhood, past the grief of single motherhood, past the graves of her sisters, her nephews, her brother, her mother, her father, past the wild elms waving their farewells, down the old dirt road and right on out into the open pasture, riddled with Indian paintbrush and black-eyed Susan, past the cow pond and the fishing shed, out to where the cotton patch of her childhood met the clear November sky. She dreamed of running.
Beautiful. So what do you think your work, your body of work so far represents? Just gonna,
a crazy person, a crazy mama, daughter, sister, a woman in the world. I feel like that's what it represents right now. Because I always come back to that question of what am I, who am I, and what the heck am I doing here?
Being a woman in this world and a creative person, and then having to make a living,
and then
with
it's not
your
easy.
family. No.
Right.
That's
it's rewarding, but it's not easy.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about this Howlers and Yoppers Creativity Symposium.
Okay. Several years ago, I was actually division chair at the time, and I had 3 very dear friends and colleagues who are no longer here at the college, but it was Jim Wilson and Rachel Clapper, Christian Morgan, Kelly McBride, Marie Dawson, and Kelly Kirk and I, and John Bartos, another of our art instructors, decided that we wanted to create experiences for our students and our Seminole, Oklahoma, and outlying rural communities for experiencing the fine arts. And we wanted to bring in professional, award-winning Oklahomans. They may be in any of the fine arts. So we wanted to bring in dancers, artists, musicians, writers, filmmakers. And we wanted to do this to show our students and our community members that you can come from Oklahoma and be phenomenal and make a living out of doing some kind of art. Right, that good things can come from this red dirt.
Yes.
And I was very humbled by how many people wanted to be part of supporting us. Ken Hayda came and shared with us, Ron Wallace, Dorothy, Alexander, Carol Hamilton, Nathan Brown. We've had Rilla Askew. We've had just so many people through the years. Bradley Beasley, who did Oklahoma Noodling, came one year. We've had Dustin Mader, Choctaw artist. Just, I can't even begin to name how many wonderful people for the past 8 years have come to promote Oklahoma and the arts here, just so our students could be exposed to that. But so many of our students come from such very, very small, underprivileged, underfunded schools. They don't have anything. They don't have band. They don't have creative writing or vocal music. They certainly probably don't have dance or theater, you know. And so to be able to come and experience some of these things has been life-changing, not only for our students, but for our faculty as well. We get so bogged down in the arts education that we are teaching, but if we don't take time out to practice, and commune with our tribe of creatives, then we're going to deplete ourselves very quickly. And so it has been rewarding in that sense, too, that we can show our students that, hey, there's this whole community of artistic people in Oklahoma, and you can have a seat at that table. And so it's become almost like a mentorship opportunity for them. Sylvester Alley, who was an old student of mine and now a very dear friend and a successful writer in his own right, was also a very strong supporter. He ran the sound system for Howlers and Yawpers for many years, too. So it's been a privilege to work with him on that kind of project as well.
Can you think of any student that you might have had in particular that told you about how he or she was changed from this, maybe had some kind of moment of inspiration or encouragement?
From the symposium?
Yeah, just the people who attend.
Yes, I can't think exactly of their names, but every year that we do this, I have a couple who come to me and say, "Hey, Professor Isaac, I didn't know you wrote." You know, because I like to share a little something too to show students that I practice what I preach, you know. And I'm like, yes, I did. And I've had a couple come to poetry readings with me. I have one in particular from my creative writing class, and I won't say her name because I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I'm hoping that she will join me sometime at the Shawnee poetry reading, which I haven't been able to go to in a while, but they have their third Thursday night poetry reading. She seems very interested in that. And I think it gives them the courage when they see a community of people coming together and they see that their professors are friends with these people, you know, or at the very least, we're not good friends, we're acquaintances, you know, and that we can help our students network and maybe guide them along the way, show them some of the different readings in the state that they can participate in if it's poetry. I have another student, I'm trying to get him hooked up with the IAO people in Oklahoma City. He's an excellent artist, and I would love for him to be able to maybe one day go to an art show there, maybe talk to some people who are artists in that community. But it helps encourage them and to see where maybe they can find an inn to belong.
That's great. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about your creative process, which we've talked about it a little bit, you know, just how you go about gathering those moods or sensations or whatever it is that's going to spark your next poem. But could you take me through your process of writing poetry or maybe other genres from that initial impulse through how do you know it's done?
Yes. So it usually always starts either with a sound or an image for me. And I can't say necessarily one over the other. There are times I carry around a tune in my head and then I finally will put words to that. And then there are times I'll see like a poem I'm working on right now and it is nowhere near finished. I saw a little tiny bird trying to attack a giant hawk. And the only thing I could surmise was that the hawk had somehow stolen maybe the tiny bird's egg or or baby or something, you know. And so I'm working on a poem with that image in my head, and but it usually always starts either with a sound or an image, and from there then I will just, you know, maybe talk out loud as I'm driving and record it. I've been doing that more and more lately, or just, you know, as I'm waiting on the kids to get through with whatever it is they're doing, write down, you know, on a piece of paper in the bottom of my purse. And then when the whole family's asleep and I'm off on like Christmas break, then I can get up early and make like 2 pots of coffee and maybe finally write down a few lines of something coherent. And then it has to percolate a little while. And some poems take years to do that. I have a few right now that I would like to see go in my second book that I wrote maybe 5 or 6 years ago. They didn't go in the first book because they weren't ready. And I don't know if they're going to make it in this second one. So I don't think they're there yet. I think a problem that, and this is just my opinion, I think poets or any writers that can just throw that stuff out there, I wonder if it's ripe yet. Because for me, that ripening process is so critical. And I do know that that holds me back, right? The thought that, oh, it's just not ready yet. It needs a little longer to stew, or it needs a little longer to go, you know, before I get that final element that makes it something. That does prevent me from sending things out for publication in a timely manner. I get that. Whereas other people are more successful than me. They're doing all kinds of publishing and winning all kinds of awards. And that is awesome, you know. And for them, that may be their process. They could just be ready a lot sooner than me. And I envy those people. Because my process is very slow. And then it goes through several layers. As far as I do a lot of counting of syllables. Math. My father would laugh at me because he knows I can't do math. But when it comes to poetry, I take the math very, very seriously. And most of the poems in my book have a very particular, could be self-created mathematical equation behind them. But there's a lot of math that has gone in to these. So I think you gotta have, even with free verse, you gotta have that sense of balance or symmetry. And so if you break the balance and symmetry, there's gotta be a reason for it too. So the structure of the poem, the architecture of it is every bit as important to me as the imagery and the sound.
How do we encourage the next generation of Oklahoma writers to stay here, or just convince them that Oklahoma is a fine place to create poetry and art, literature?
We have to make sure they can make a living to support themselves here. And I think just by continuing to be a community and to pull together in ways and to speak out on things, which I think our Oklahoma, you know, writing communities do that very well. You know, they band together, they speak out on political issues, they are promoting the arts in many different towns and cities across Oklahoma. But I think just allowing people in to be part of that process and taking a chance on them, and also guiding them too. Because we can say to somebody in a kind way, this was a good poem that you read tonight, but I think, have you ever considered maybe cutting the last 2 stanzas, right? Or something of that nature, you know? We have to be able to have those conversations and not get offended with one another too. But creating cultural events, creating jobs and places where they can go. And I don't know what those jobs would be. teaching always comes to mind,
Right.
but we need to offer more publishing opportunities for money, you know, in this state as well. And I'm certainly not the person to know where to begin with any of that.
Yeah, it's definitely tough.
Yes.
So what's the best writing advice that you could give?
To do it.
Yeah.
And to listen to people. I have so many, not just of my own personal students, but people who will send me books to review that they're working on, and they're not ready. They're not finished. But then they get mad, right? When you say, work on it a little bit longer, do these things, and then let's see it again. It's that listening aspect and taking the constructive criticism. People get their feelings hurt. Writing is very personal. But if you're not willing to listen to the people who've gone before you, you can't possibly learn and improve. And I think that would be the biggest bit of advice, is to do it and then to redo it over and over and over again.
Yeah, because you'll learn.
Yes.
And grow.
No writing's ever finished.
Right. Yeah. So what are you working on currently? You've mentioned it a little bit.
I'm working on putting together another book of poems. I can't decide what I want the general flow or feel of it to be. And so I have this set of poems, and it can go in a few different ways. And it may be that it's really not one full book. It may be that I've got 2 or 3 chapbooks kind of stuck together in one, which is kind of the way I felt about Deep August. I feel like I kind of shoved some things in there when maybe they were different books. And so I'm trying to decide how I want to proceed right now with that.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that maybe we didn't mention or cover?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
We kind of got it.
Go on. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest questions that I grapple with, and I know that a lot of educators in Oklahoma do as well, is why the heck do we stay here?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Why do we stay here?
Why do we stay? And I think this ties back to your question about how can we encourage young writers and artists to stay in Oklahoma or to grow into the craft. And we just got to give them more money. You know, we got to provide more money to the arts and humanities and to education in general in the state of Oklahoma. And where that money's going to come from, I'm not sure. You know, I think there's some appropriation magic that could happen at the state level to help with funding these things. But something has to happen. And so I find, especially since I just finished my MFA a year ago, and I've got these student loans to pay for, and I'm taking on extra duties at my college to help pay for those, I'm exhausted, as most Oklahoma educators are. We are worn plumb out, just trying to make ends meet. And it shouldn't be that way, you know? And that, of course, takes a toll on the creative process. But I found it interesting that I've been having this conversation with myself for many years. And so I have a poem in my book called This, which grapples with this issue. Why the heck do I stay, right? I mean, I'm very rooted to Oklahoma. My parents are here. It's where I grew up. But to make more money, I would need to leave this state. And I don't know if I'm ever willing to take my children and uproot them while they're still in school and do all of that. That's a scary thing to think about, going and starting over. But I have friends who have done it.
Right.
And they are happy and professionally well off and all of that. But I really have a heart for Oklahoma. I would like to see Oklahoma do better.
Yes.
I believe we can.
We can.
But I'd like to read this poem, This. That talks about this issue. And again, this was several years ago, and I'm still having this problem. 72 degrees with a full moon rising slowly on a pink horizon and an orange Oklahoma sun sparkling across the rippling farm pond. It's evenings like these, listening to the cicadas and frogs singing, my 10-year-old son zinging shots out of his pellet gun, watching my dad and daughter feeding the catfish, guzzling wine with my mother, and laughing about the family gossip. It's evenings like these, the air soft on our temples, our lives, well, we have no electric. Wow. I don't even know.
All right, so we're picking back up where we left off with Jessica Isaacs. We have moved locations because the power in the town of Seminole went out.
The whole town.
The whole town.
Mm-hmm.
So we have relocated to our home here in Prague, and we were, ironically enough, talking about working in the arts and grappling with why we stay here,
right,
and what moves us to stay in Oklahoma despite the difficulties, the darkness to make it really bad.
Yes.
And you were reading a poem called This, so let's just start that over and explain why you picked this particular one.
Okay. So I recently received my MFA from the Red Earth program from Oklahoma City University, and during that time, I had the privilege of working with more than two, but particularly two beautiful women. Allison Hedgecoke was my first faculty mentor, and I learned so much from her. And so, like when I think about John Yozo, I think, what would Yozo do whenever I'm thinking about teaching? Often when I'm making my poems now, I think, what would Allison do? And I learned a great deal from her commentary on my poetry as we worked together in part of that program. And then Janetta Calhoun-Mish was my other faculty mentor. And she's, of course, the Oklahoma State Poet Laureate. And she and I share a lot of the same Oklahoma small town kind of roots and in our sense of place. And I see that coming up with some of our sensibilities in both of our writing. So it's very much a privilege to get to work with two powerhouses, I think, of poetry and Oklahoma poetry particularly. But I often think, why do I stay in the state of Oklahoma as an educator when I know that in order to make more money, I need to move out of this state? And I always come back to the same reasons. It's because my family roots are here, and I don't want to uproot the family. Take my kids out of school and move to a new town. It's a very difficult thing to start over like that. And so many people do it, and I have so much admiration for them. I wish I had that kind of courage to do that. But Oklahoma still has much to offer. And I would like for our young people and our new writers and new artists in the state to try to find a way to stay, because I think that it is something that we have to do. We all have to come together and make a path for one another so that we can stay. But this is a question, at any rate, that I come back to time and time again, really at the end of every semester when I'm grading all of my student papers. I come back to this question, why am I still here in Oklahoma? So this poem is called This. 72 degrees with a full moon rising slowly on a pink horizon and an orange Oklahoma sun sparkling across the rippling farm pond. It's evenings like these, listening to the cicadas and frogs singing, my 10-year-old son zinging shots out of his pellet gun, watching my dad and daughter feeding the catfish, guzzling wine with my mother and laughing about the family gossip. It's evenings like these, the air soft on our temple, our life scented with the smell of freshly mown hay, that I know this is why I stay in this state for less pay than I'm worth. This is why we all choose Oklahoma in the end. Oklahoma red is in our blood, and we feel her seasons like the weather changing in our veins.
Right. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jessica. We got this done. We're dedicated. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.